In the past, it was a staple of kidnappings for the hostage to hold up a newspaper to prove that they're still alive. The problem with me is that I started reading the newspapers I was holding up, although I'm still, as you can judge by our social media overlords, in captivity. Nevertheless, I'll try my best to get what news I can out to you given the constraints. First up, stories on the domestic news front that I'm tracking. Your briefing begins with the headline, "It's been 30 years since food ate up this much of your income." In 1991, U.S. consumers spent 11.4% of their disposable personal income on food, according to data from the U.S. Agriculture Department. At the time, households were still dealing with steep food price increases following an inflationary period during the 1970s. More than 3 decades later, food spending has reattained that level, USDA data shows. In 2022, consumers spent 11.3% of their disposable income on food, according to the most recent USDA data available. Food inflation has raised the ire of President Biden, who took to Instagram during the Super Bowl to blast food makers that he said were providing less bang for consumers' buck, putting fewer chips in each bag or shrinking the size of ice cream containers. The American public is tired of being played for suckers, Biden said. "I've had enough of what they call shrinkflation. It's a ripoff." Historians have long noted a relationship between food inflation and revolutions. As early as the late Bronze Age collapse in 1200 BC, a famine arrived, and archaeologists point to evidence of riots which were triggered by this as people attacked their own governments and these empires collapsed. This became a subject for geopolitical strategists who noted the rise in food costs and color revolutions around the world. According to the latest data from the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, food prices have reached an all-time high since the UN started tracking prices in the 1990s. This means, Times' Krista Meyer points out, we're wrestling with costs that are higher than the June 2008 prices that triggered food riots in Haiti and the Philippines. Tack on the FAO's statement that the number of hungry people is higher in 2010 than before the food and economic crises of 2008 and 9, and the fact that Egyptians spend about 40% of their income on food, and it would seem reasonable to think that rising food prices are behind what's happening in Egypt. In fact, a connection has been suggested several times in the past week. This is very similar to the French Revolution, where they had synthetic famines preceding the collapse of the monarchy. And it's good to note that if there really will be a great reset, it will likely be preceded by food shortages and cost hikes in everyday staple items, hence the attacks on farmers that we're seeing now. It's also good to remember as well that the government routinely kind of fudges the numbers when it comes to inflation rates, the CPI. They'll usually not include the items that actually cost people money, like healthcare or college tuition or housing costs or car payments. They'll factor out all those things and they'll take some, innocuous item like thumbnail tax and say, oh, thumbnail tax have only risen 3% in cost. So the inflation rate is at 3% if we don't count all the other expenditures that a family has, that eat into their discretionary income. So the actual inflation rate, is in double digits while they're telling us that it's at 3%. So if they're saying that we're at an 11% food hike, it's probably somewhat higher than that. And once it hits 40%, that's when we're talking about revolutionary times. In other words, once valued at $5.7 billion, Vice Media stops publishing and is no more. Having once been valued at $5.7 billion in 2017 and acquired out of bankruptcy last year by a consortium including George Soros, the company announced plans to cut hundreds of jobs and has, as of 14 hours ago, stopped publishing on Vice.com. The Vice CMS has been turned off. That's all, folks. Chief Executive Bruce Dixon said, "It is no longer cost-effective for us to distribute our digital content the way we have done previously. The once supposedly edgy media outlet has been ridiculed for years for allowing its output to descend into the most utterly demented, vulgar, and degenerate far-left content." Well, that's kind of the template that they use, isn't it? They usually will force a place to go woke, as they call it, right? And then the place starts to, the wheels start to come off the project, and then they come in to bail it out, and they have strings attached to it, and they take it over, kind of like what happened with the Catholic Church, or what happened to the Boy Scouts. You need more gay scoutmasters. You need more gay scoutmasters. If you don't have gay scoutmasters, and then they capitulate, they allow the gay scoutmasters, then all of a sudden there's an explosion of molestations, and then the same people come back and say, oh, we're going to sue you into the ground. And then they're like, oh, well, we did what you told us, and they're like, it doesn't matter. We're going to sue you now for all these molestations, but we'll give you a lifeline. You're bankrupted, but we will bail you out. George Soros is here with some money to bail you out, but there will be strings attached for the new Boy Scouts. And then the new Boy Scouts, they're going to have LGBT badges and Pfizer badges and all these other things. So they'll usually bankrupt an organization. And they did that to Vice. Disney is another example. Like they make sure that you're on the skids, and then they come in and kind of take over. But this leads us into international news. China's shock statement. Palestinians have a right to use armed force against Israel. The comments on Thursday were made by the Chinese ambassador to the UN, Zhang Jun, during the fourth day of public hearings held by the International Court of Justice in The Hague, Netherlands. He described the Palestinian use of armed resistance as legitimate and not an act of terrorism. The struggle waged by peoples for their liberation, right to self-determination, including armed struggle against colonialism, occupation, aggression, domination against foreign forces, should not be considered terror acts, Zhang Jun told the court. In his speech, Jun criticized Israeli policies, characterizing them as, quote, oppression that has severely undermined and impeded the exercises and full realization of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, end quote. This is really a shot fired across the bow of the Atlanticist power grid, right? So they see Israel as an outpost of the British Empire in the Middle East. It was created by Britain in the modern era, kind of as a sentinel, as a satellite state, for British imperial policies and control in the crucial petroleum producing region. And now the BRICS countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, they see their version of that as being Iran, right? So they're siding with Iran versus Israel. And so we're seeing kind of an emergence of a multipolar world. And this may be yet another sign of that, which leads us into the news of the weird. The state of education is reaching crisis levels, as literacy rates are at historic lows and as children can't do math and know nothing of their own history. It's good to see that we have budget allocations for this stuff.
Sex means different things to different people. Generally speaking, society tends to define sex in a very narrow way. Penetration, penis into vagina. But where does that definition leave queer people? Or folks who can't or don't have penis and vagina sex, and choose to have oral, anal, or another type of sex instead? Sex is defined by one thing and one thing only: you. Maybe that's being fingered for the first time. Maybe it's having anal sex. Maybe it's having your first orgasm. Maybe it's masturbating for the first time, or when you enthusiastically consent to sex. That's the beauty of your sexual journey. You're in charge, and you can figure it out on your own terms. Choosing to have sex, when, what kind, where, who with, is something that only you get to define.
Sorry, just had to sage to get rid of the demons that were coming off of that. And this, my friends, is why the public education system is dead. And speaking of dead, that leads us into our obituary segment. Award-winning country music singer and hee-haw actress, dead at age 85. Veronica Loretta Ronnie Stoneman, an award-winning bluegrass singer and comedian known for her role on a country music show, has died. She was 85 years old. Best known for her role in Hee Haw, Ronnie Stoneman was the youngest daughter of Ernest V. Pop Stoneman. He was the patriarch of the Stoneman family, one of the most famous family groups in early country music. Our condolences go out to the family of Miss Ronnie Stoneman. But for the rest of you, I'd like to thank you for watching the show, or as I like to call it, that suspicious gap in my resume. See you next time. Consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.